The matter has, no doubt, its humorous side, yet many persons may think that it has not only a serious side, but a seriousness which goes far beyond what might at first blush be supposed. It is not merely that in this instance Parliament is being outmanoeuvred, or that in that instance the courts have been defied. It is that the whole scheme of self-government is being undermined, and that too, in a way which no self-respecting people, if they were aware of the facts, would for a moment tolerate. Much nonsense, to be sure, is written about what is called democracy. It might be thought, on the testimony of some of its apologists, that democracy was a patent medicine, on the testimony of others that it was a fancy religion. But when once the fact is appreciated that democracy is really the name of a form of government, the essence of which is that every citizen in the state shares the responsibility for the good government of the state, and when it is further understood that, in the opinion of many competent observers, by no means confined to this side of the Atlantic alone, the great achievement and the enduring pride of our history and institutions are precisely to have exhibited to the world, in an unexampled way, the art and practice of real self-government, as well in peace as in war, the true dimensions of the present issue, and the true nature of the assault which is being resisted, become reasonably clear. Much toil, and not a little blood, have been spent in bringing slowly into being a polity wherein the people make their laws, and independent judges administer them. If that edifice is to be overthrown, let the overthrow be accomplished openly. Never let it be said that liberty and justice, having with difficulty been won, were suffered to be abstracted or impaired in a fit of absence of mind. The paradox which is in course of being accomplished is, indeed, rather elaborate. Writers on the Constitution have for a long time taught that its two leading features are the sovereignty of Parliament and the rule of law. To tamper with either of them was, it might be thought, a sufficiently serious undertaking, but how far more attractive to the ingenious and adventurous mind to employ the one to defeat the other, and to establish a despotism on the ruins of both! It is manifestly easy to point a superficial contrast between what was done or attempted in the days of our least wise kings, and what is being done or attempted today. In those days the method was to defy Parliament, and it failed. In these days the method is to cajole, to coerce, and to use Parliament, and it is strangely successful. The old despotism, which was defeated, offered Parliament a challenge. The new despotism, which is not yet defeated, gives Parliament an anaesthetic. The strategy is different, but the goal is the same. It is to subordinate Parliament, to evade the courts, and to render the will, or the caprice, of the executive unfettered and supreme. The old king, as Rudyard Kipling sings in The Old Issue, sometimes reappears under a new name. All we have of freedom, all we use or know, this our fathers bought for us long and long ago. Ancient right unnoticed as the breath we draw, leave to live by no man's leave underneath the law. Over all things certain, this is sure indeed, suffer not the old king, for we know the breed. Howso great their clamour, whatsoe'er their claim, suffer not the old king under any name. It is pleasant to observe the excuses which are from time to time put forward by the apologists of bureaucratic encroachment. One of the most ingenious of them has lately expressed his opinion in the following way. Provided, he says, that matters of principle and of substance are reserved for Parliament itself, provided that, as is usually the case with vigilant and well-organised interests, those concerned have been consulted in advance, provided that the minister can be called to account for any wrongful or excessive exercise of his powers, and provided that full publicity can be secured, then the system of departmental legislation has advantages of elasticity, promptness, and technical knowledge which may be set against the dangers of encroachment by the executive upon the citizen's liberty. The accumulation of successive provisos in this carefully constructed plea may be thought to be interesting and instructive. The strength of a chain is the strength of its weakest link. How, it may be asked, if matters of principle or of substance are not reserved for Parliament itself? How, if those concerned, and as a rule the public is concerned, have not been consulted in advance? And how, if publicity cannot be secured until the mischief has been done? As for the proviso that the minister can be called to account for any wrongful or excessive exercise of his powers, two reflections at least are unavoidable. One is that prevention is better than cure, and indescribably better than mitigation. The other is that experience has shown too often what precisely the process of calling the minister to account may be worth. What with the collective responsibility of ministers and the inexorable demands of the party system, once the mischief has been done, the whole force of the parliamentary majority tends to be directed, not so much to undoing it, as to preventing a defeat in a parliamentary division. This is our lobby, says the whips, when the critical moment comes, and at the 11th hour the private member is naturally disposed to acquiesce. Here, as elsewhere, it seems to be important to distinguish things which are different from each other. It is one thing to confer power, subject to proper restrictions, to make regulations. It is another thing to give those regulations the force of a statute. It is one thing to make regulations which are to have no effect unless and until they are approved by Parliament. It is another thing to make regulations behind the back of Parliament which come into force without the assent or even the knowledge of Parliament. Again, it is a strong thing to place the decision of a minister in a matter affecting the rights of individuals beyond the possibility of review by the courts of law, and it is a strong thing to empower a minister to modify, by his personal or departmental order, the provisions of a statute which has been enacted. Delhomme said that indeed that Parliament could do everything but make a man a woman or a woman a man. There are those who think that it has now, to some extent, accomplished even that feat. But what would Delhomme have said to the suggestion that Parliament should enact that a particular individual should have power, at his pleasure, to override its enactment? An agreeable writer, collecting from the pages of Boswell and elsewhere individual opinions expressed by Samuel Johnson, has compiled and composed a kind of Johnsonian creed or soliloquy, which sums up concisely the essence of his faith. If a similar method were applied to the ardent bureaucrat, the amateur of the new despotism, his reflections might perhaps be indicated in some such creed as this. 1. The business of the executive is to govern. 2. The only persons fit to govern are experts. 3. The experts in the art of government are the permanent officials who, exhibiting an ancient and too much neglected virtue, think themselves worthy of great things, being worthy. 4. But the expert must deal with things as they are. The foursquare man makes the best of the circumstances in which he finds himself. 5. Two main obstacles hamper the beneficent work of the expert. One is the sovereignty of Parliament, and the other is the rule of law. 6. A kind of fetish worship, prevalent among an ignorant public, prevents the destruction of these obstacles. The expert, therefore, must make use of the first in order to frustrate the second. 7. To this end, let him, under parliamentary forms, clothe himself with despotic power, and then, because the forms are parliamentary, defy the law courts. 8. This course will prove tolerably simple if he can a. Get legislation passed in skeleton form, b. Fill up the gaps with his own rules, orders and regulations, c. Make it difficult or impossible for Parliament to check the said rules, orders and regulations, d. Secure for them the force of statute, e. Make his own decision final, f. Arrange that the fact of his decision shall be conclusive proof of its legality, g. Take power to modify the provisions of statutes, and h. Prevent and avoid any sort of appeal to a court of law. 9. If the expert can get rid of the Lord Chancellor, reduce the judges to a branch of the civil service, compel them to give opinions beforehand on hypothetical cases, and appoint them himself through a businessman to be called Minister of Justice, the coping stone will be laid, and the music will be the fuller. Yet in observing the bureaucratic encroachments, the manifestations of the new despotism of recent years, especially under the greater latitude encouraged and bequeathed by the war, it is necessary to beware of a common fallacy. It is natural and usual enough when the acts of any body or of men, or of any association or organisation, are being considered, as for example a government, a cabinet, a party, a committee, or a newspaper, to assume that that which has been done is a true reflection of the intentions and the wishes of every individual member of the association. But this assumption is not always correct. It may well be that, in the particular circumstances, responsibility in relation to third parties must be shared by all and can be escaped by none, yet, if all the facts were known, it might often appear that, within the body which was being criticised, there was a sincere minority, whether large or small, whose opinions tended rather to coincide with the opinions of the critic himself, and who were habitually engaged, behind the scenes, in combating, in preventing, and in reducing, at any rate, the dimensions of the kind of mischief under consideration. So when the performances of the new despotism are under review, it is natural enough to employ such a phrase as the government departments. But it would be strange indeed if they were all cut after the same pattern, or if everybody comprised within them were of the same mind. Nobody who was at all aware of the facts would dream of entertaining any such view. There can be no doubt, for example, that the law officers of the Crown, the Treasury Solicitor, and the parliamentary draftsmen have from time to time used all their influence to prevent or to mitigate acts which they could not approve. In a sense, the fact is welcome, but it has a formidable aspect as well. If in truth and in fact the things which are done exhibit only the resultant force derived from influences that are to some extent in conflict, it follows that the force which makes directly in favour of those things is strong indeed. Such, there can be little doubt, is the force of the new despotism in Whitehall. End of chapter 1.